Last week, I did a video reviewing some of the unreleased cards that are currently in the game's client. The client meaning that you can go to the collection and you can look at the silhouettes of the cards by selecting unowned cards. So far in Marvel Snap's history, we haven't seen a client card be changed. We haven't even seen a stat value of a client card be changed. We've only seen leaked cards that aren't in the client be updated. The example I used in last week's video was Ghost Spider. We've seen her change quite a lot, even though she was leaked a long time ago. We've seen both her effect and her stats change multiple times. So until Ghost Spider, or until any of these cards are actually in the client, I'm assuming that all of these leaked cards are subject to change. With the latest patch to Marvel Snap, we have a total of 5 new cards that are added to the collection. Again, you can't unlock these characters right now. They're not currently in the game, but they're in the client. But if you want a more in-depth explanation as to what I mean by 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 star card, you can go to last week's video where I went a little bit more in depth. I'll leave a link to that video in the description, and on screen, obviously, right now you're seeing a graph that is kind of like a too long didn't read or too long didn't listen to version of how these star systems work. With that said, we can jump straight into the newly leaked cards for Marvel Snap. Starting off with Agent Coulson, these I believe are in alphabetical order, unlike last time, which I did in energy cost order. Agent Coulson is a 3/4, so a 3 energy, 4 power card with odd reveal, add a random 4 cost and a random 5 cost card to your hand. So he's a 3/4 that draws you 2 cards. These 2 cards are random cards. When I first looked at Agent Coulson, my first thought was, well, this is an arena card if I've ever seen one, but Marvel Snap doesn't have arena, so what are we actually doing with Agent Coulson? There are some decks out there that might want to run a lot of 6-cost cards, and they kind of get punished for running that many 6-cost cards. So their opening hand can be, we'll use the term bricked, where they'll have too many high-cost cards that they can't really get out any tempo plays, or they can't start developing towards those big power plays that they want to, because those big power plays don't work unless you have some pre-established power set up, because a 6-cost card is not enough to win a game on its own. So to some extent, you need to curve out. There are currently cards in the game that kind of support that idea. Cards like Quicksilver and Domino are both guaranteed draws for a 1 and a 2 drop. We haven't seen Quicksilver or Domino get a bunch of play, at least at a higher level, but there might be a world where if we continue to add these cards that more or less reward you for having a quote-unquote bad curve in your deck, Agent Coulson in this case is a card you could theoretically run in a deck that is trying to play big cards on turn 6 or turn 5, and Agent Coulson kind of just lets you guaranteed get a 4-drop to follow up. On average, I would say most 4-drops are on the lower side of the power curve. Most of the 4-drop cards are build-around cards, but they're also cards that are kind of okay to draw on your own. Like, if you were to just get a random Namor in your hand, you're not too upset about it. So there is a line where Agent Coulson could be good, but personally, I don't think we're there yet. I'm going to give Agent Coulson 2 stars. I think he'll see some amount of play, and I'd say he's probably the type of card that the longer Marvel Snap exists, the more play Agent Coulson will see, or the higher percentage of decks that Agent Coulson will be in. We don't know the order of the effect, so this is one thing I want to bring up before I move on to the next card. We don't know the order of the effect. We don't know if it just kind of chooses one of those things to add to your hand first, or if the 4-cost card comes into your hand first. And the reason that order might matter is because if your hand is going to be full because of this effect, I think if you're putting Agent Coulson in your deck, you care more about the 4-cost card than you do about the 5-cost card. So I hope that the order of this is it goes 4-cost first all of the time, and then the 5-cost card. But I guess we won't know until we get access to Agent Coulson. That is, however, how I would assume the effect works, is that it would always pick the 4-cost card first. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Moving on to Helicarrier, our second vehicle in the game. Helicarrier is a 6 energy, 10 power card, so pretty good stats. When you discard this card from your hand, add 3 random cards to your hand. Now, this is an exciting one. The most obvious home for this card right now, at least in my opinion, is the Hela Invisible Woman deck. You already want to discard cards in that deck, and Helicarrier has a discard condition, so that's nice. One of the things you might think about this card is that the evaluation of it depends on how good a random card is in Marvel Snap, but I actually think it might come down to how good a random card is when it's pulled from Hela specifically. Because again, I don't think there is a home for this card right now, unless it is Hela discard. So how good is a random card in Marvel Snap when it's pulled from Hela? That I am not sure of. I'm sure there are people out there who are willing to do the math for what are the average stats of a Marvel Snap card, but that average is always going to be in flux, so I'm not particularly concerned about that, at least at the moment. I think with a card like this, we can probably pretty consistently fill the board with Hela. It is hard for me to tell because I haven't actually played much of the Hela discard deck, and it's also hard for me to judge this card specifically, not only because I haven't played much of the Hela discard deck, but also because I have no idea what this list will actually look like once we have Helicarrier. Because I have no idea what this deck list is going to look like once we have Helicarrier. Because if we are running Helicarrier, the list is not going to look the same. We have to cut out quite a bit of the top end, and we're probably going to be relying on Helicarrier and one of the cards that I'm going to talk about later in this video to help us generate the big powerful cards that we want to summon with Hela, rather than actually having to run those cards in our deck. Again, I'm not sure about this one because it is very difficult to say without having access to that version of Hela and also without having played much of Hela myself. With that said, my evaluation is that I think Helicarrier will be good enough that we do modify the Hela deck. And for that reason, I'm going to put Helicarrier at 3 stars. I will say Helicarrier on its own is probably not enough to push that type of Hela deck, but one of the other cards we're going to talk about later on in this video helps it get to there. This next card I talk about is not the card in question, but it is going to be Maria Hill. Maria Hill is a 2/3 with the effect on reveal, add a random 1-cost card to your hand. I've actually spent a decent amount of time thinking about this card, and I'm pretty unsure about it. A card like this is either deceptively very good, or it's just very bad, at least from a competitive standpoint. I love this design, and I like this type of card. It definitely adds fun to the game, and it definitely adds value to the game, but strictly speaking, from a competitive standpoint, this card either sucks or it's deceptively powerful. Personally, I think Khazar and other types of aggro lists probably don't have a reason to run this card. It's probably just a little bit too slow. With that said, on average, a 1-drop is very, very good. There are some 1-drops that will certainly be a low roll. Cards like Ebony Moore, for example, could essentially brick you, or cards like the Hood, you might not have ways to get rid of it or have any particular synergy with it. But on average, you're just going to end up getting a 1/2, and sometimes that 1/2 is even going to have a decent effect. And sometimes, we talked about the low rolls, you have to talk about the high rolls. Sometimes you'll get an Iron Fist that lets you move into Sanctum Sanctorum where you wouldn't have otherwise been able to, or even Death's Domain, or one of those types of locations that are difficult to get into. Similar to what I said with Phil Coulson, I think decks that care about the late game, that want to try to pad their curve through external effects, might want to run Maria Hill. No joke, might actually be a deck that wants to pad their curve this way. You'll be surprised just how important it is to be energy efficient in Marvel Snap, and Maria Hill and Phil Coulson both help you do that. I am going to give her the exact same rating I gave Agent Coulson, which is 2 stars, even though I do think she's actually quite a bit better than Phil Coulson. I would say that Phil Coulson is on like the bottom end of 2 stars, and Maria Hill is on the top end of 2 stars. All right, moving on to Nicholas Fury. This is the card I spoke about when we were talking about Helicarrier. Nick Fury is a 5/7 with the effect on reveal, add 3 random 6-cost cards to your hand. This is going to be pretty similar to what I said about Helicarrier. I think Nick Fury is our big build-around card for future Hela decks. The Hela deck wants to run a lot of top-heavy cards, and because of that, their opening hands can sometimes brick really, really hard. If we run Nick Fury and we run Helicarrier, we can eliminate most of that top end, with the exception of Hela herself, and maybe another 6-drop, and we can start running a lower curve to help us in the early game. Just talking about Nick Fury generally now, 6-drops on average are pretty insane in this game. What you'll notice from looking at all of these 6-drops is you're pretty much happy to have any of these cards added to your hand randomly. But there is an issue. If the end goal is to actually put Nick Fury into a Hela deck, there are some pretty damaging results that can come from adding 6-drops randomly to the field. The 2 6-drops that come to mind are Destroyer and Arnim Zola. These 6-drops can completely ruin your strategy by either blowing up your board entirely or just selectively. So if Nick Fury is the future build-around card for Hela decks, that's something they're going to have to keep in mind. They're going to have to remember that, hey, there is some percentage chance here that after I play this Nick Fury and then everything else flips over because of Invisible Woman and I discard all of my cards and I resummon them because of Hela, there is a chance that I'm just going to completely destroy my entire board. There are currently 19 6-drops in the game right now, so it's a 1 in 19 chance that that happens. Technically, it's not a 1 in 19 chance. It's actually lower because you would have to also discard the card as a part of your random discards, which isn't going to happen every time. So it is lower than a 1 in 19 chance, which is worth keeping in mind. But what actually is a 1 in 19 chance, or actually I guess it's 3 1 in 19 chances, is that you actually get another copy of Hela into your hand through Nick Fury's effect. So if you don't draw your Hela, which is your primary win condition in that deck. You pretty much need Hela to close out games with that deck. Nick Fury gives you a chance to draw Hela again. It actually gives you 3 chances. 3, 1 in 19. That sounds pretty decent to get another copy of Hela in games that I don't draw my Hela. So like we went over, there are definitely some downsides to Nick Fury, but I think the upsides well and truly outweigh those downsides. And I do think that we will start seeing, once both Nick Fury and Helicarrier are in the game, or even just when Nick Fury's in the game, that we start building our Hela decks around this card. For that reason, I think Nick Fury is actually going to be really powerful. I'm going to put Nick Fury at 4 stars. I think if Hela wasn't around, we probably wouldn't build around Nick Fury. But with the context of Hela, I think that we absolutely build around Nick Fury. All right, moving on to our very last card here, we have Super Skrull, which actually has a really interesting effect. Super Skrull is a 4/2 with the effect Ongoing, has the ongoing effects of all enemy cards. That is a pretty crazy effect. Super Skrull does not have an obvious home right now. There's not really a deck right now that we can just say, hey, put Super Skrull in this. It is also really difficult to judge just how powerful this card is. Quite a lot of decks currently run ongoing effects, even if their deck isn't necessarily built around the mechanic. For example, Ant-Man is a card that you see pretty consistently throughout the game. So Super Skrull should, quote unquote, activate a decent amount of the time. Keep in mind that if the effect that you're copying has a specific condition, like for example, Ant-Man, you'll have to go out of your way to activate that and get value from Super Skrull. I don't know how often that's going to happen. Now, if we do end up running Super Skrull, it's going to be because of one of 2 reasons. The fact that he himself is an ongoing effect, so that lets us use quote-unquote ongoing matters effects, so cards like Spectrum and Onslaught can take advantage of him, especially Spectrum, because if he's not getting any value, if he's not copying any other ongoing effects, well, at the very least, he's going to get +2 from Spectrum's from Spectrum's on reveal. The other reason we might run this card is simply a meta-dependent issue. If we're going to see a lot of crazy Onslaught, Iron Man, Omega Red decks, if that does become meta and we start seeing more and more of those types of decks, Super Skrull is pretty much a perfect counter to that deck. I mean, he just does everything you do. He does your entire game plan in just one single card. But even with a less dramatic example, let's just apply that to something like Iron Man or Ant-Man or Devil Dinosaur. He just becomes a strictly better version of that card, but on your side of the field. Oftentimes, if your opponent plays Iron Man, it's to single-handedly swing a lane. But if you play Super Skrull even before turn 6, if you just play Super Skrull on turn 5 or turn 4, now your opponent's going to be much more hesitant about dropping that Iron Man unless they intend to lose that lane anyway, because no matter where he is on the field, Super Skrull copies the effect. It doesn't say ongoing effects from all enemy cards in this location. It just takes all enemy ongoing cards. So if you put this down on a swing lane, it's going to be hard for decks that use Iron Man and Devil Dino to swing lanes. It's going to be hard for them to be able to do that at all because you're just a better version of that on your side of the field. The +2 power on Super Skrull compared to those 2 cards lets him go over the top every time. Heck, even against something like Professor X, Super Skrull can kind of go crazy, right? So again, 2 sides to it. Maybe there's an ongoing deck that wants to take advantage of this anyway because it's a Spectrum deck, so ongoing matters. But on the opposite side of that coin, just maybe it is a meta-dependent card, and it might be really, really strong against decks that use ongoing effects to go over the top or to quote-unquote swing a lane. I'm going to put Super Skrull at 3 stars. I think Spectrum decks will find it very difficult to run Super Skrull because he costs 4, which is quite expensive. Usually on 4, you want to be playing your Wong, and then on 5, you want to be playing your Mystique, and then maybe like a 2-drop or a 1-drop. Playing Super Skrull, it's going to be hard to find a slot, because every turn after turn 4, you have a very specific game plan of what you want to ideally do. I don't know if Super Skrull kind of fits into that slot, but I think 3 stars is fair to him because, again, the tech situation that we were just talking about. And you might think, well, maybe Super Skrull's a bad tech card because why wouldn't you just run Enchantress to defeat an opponent's Onslaught or an opponent's Dino? Well, Super Skrull's actually better than an Enchantress in this case because he's ongoing, so he'll happen later. Enchantress, you have to get very specific timing. You either have to do it on turn 6 to swing a lane, or you have to fight for, not initiative, the opposite of initiative, right? You have to make sure your opponent has initiative so that you can swing correctly with Enchantress. But Super Skrull's ongoing, so you can just put him down, and if the opponent plays a card, well, then now you have the effect, and sure, they still have the effect, but you should be going over the top if you're playing this card because he has the base stat of 2. So yeah, I think he's a powerful tech card. We're going to put him at 3. and I'm pretty happy with these ratings. I'm excited about all of these cards. I might even be more excited about these cards than the cards we talked about in the last video, especially if you take away cards like Galactus and Thanos that have been in the client since day one. And those are the two cards that I'm most excited about over any card, truth be told. Yeah, I'd say if I'm excited about any card here in particular the most, it would be Nick Fury. I think the Hela Nick Fury deck is going to be super fun. Lots of high rolls, lots of exciting moments. And those are the types of decks I like. So let me know what you think of the brand new cards that have been added to the client in Marvel Snap. I hope you're enjoying the brand new season. I might do a Daredevil video pretty soon, talking about his impact on the game, compare him to how I reviewed him, and see how we feel about that. So if you enjoyed these types of videos, please be sure to subscribe. We're trying to get our custom URL. We're getting pretty close to 100 subscribers, which is the requirement for that. So thank you so much for all the support. I'm going to be live on Twitch throughout the week, so if you can go follow me over there, I'd also appreciate that. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Again, thank you for watching. I'll see you around. Keep being awesome.